Hello, everybody. I want to welcome everybody to today's public DPLA session and an important community conversation that we want to have today. Um, and we really hope to see some meaningful dialogue and participation and welcome everybody to do that. My name is Denise Stevens. I'm current chair of the board for DPLA, and I'd like to take a quick minute to ask our board members present to introduce themselves so that you can associate names with faces. Let's start with Jennifer.
Hi, my name is Jenny Lee. I've been a board member for DPLA for 6 years, almost 6 years. And I basically run a literary studio with does innovative things in publishing. Some of the projects we've done have kind of dovetailed with DPLA.
Felton?
Hi, I'm Felton Thomas. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the Cleveland Public Library, and I've been with the board now 2 years.
Thank you, Felton. Catherine?
Hi, my name is Catherine Marr. I'm the Executive Director and CEO as well of the Wikimedia Foundation, which is the organization that runs Wikipedia. I think I've been with the board now a full term. I nearly really appreciate being here.
Great. And I'll just call on you as I see you present on my screen. Jill.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jill Bourne. I'm the director of the San Jose Public Library in California. And I think this is my second year, although most of the time on the board has been during the pandemic. So it's an unusual term so far.
Thank you. Elaine?
Hi, I'm Elaine Westbrooks. I'm the University Librarian and Vice Provost at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I believe this is my second year on the board.
Suzanne?
Oh, hi there. I'm Suzanne. I'm the Development Associate with DPLA, and I've been here also just since the beginning of the pandemic.
Thank you, Suzanne. I didn't mean to call on you. That's my fault. But now we know who you are.
I figured I'd just give myself a shout out. Thank you.
All right. Michael?
Hi, I'm Michael Delabit. I'm the Director of Technology at DPLA.
Okay. I'm going to see if I have any other board members present that I've overlooked. It doesn't appear so. Therefore, I guess we'll move on to the meat of the agenda today.
Thanks, Denise. Hi, I'm John Bracken. I'm the Executive Director at DPLA. I am the appetizer before we get to the meat of the agenda. Welcome, everyone. I want to give a special welcome to all of you who are at your first DPLA community meeting. We are ecstatic to have you with us. And I want to wish everyone a happy Martin Luther King Day. I think this year, I think it's an extra special holiday for all of us. We need it. Two notes. One, you can see the closed captioning, which you're welcome to turn off if you like. Two, we're recording this for future edification for sharing and posting, FYI. And my colleague Kat will be posting links and kind of doing general Google jockeying DJ work in the chat room, making reference to what I'm sharing. So what is this community board meeting? It's kind of, I don't know if it's unique, but it's something we're really proud of being able to do here at DPLA. It's an opportunity for us to bring together the various sectors and types of folks that we get to work with on a daily basis and share it with you. Looking over the list of who y'all are, we've got community archivists, public librarians, academic librarians, teachers, artists, activists. Some of you were multiple of those identities. And it's really special process for us because, as some of you know, it's how we came to be. We came to be created as an organization through community-based conversations. And I think, given the past 10 months we've had as a country, we feel even more privileged to be able to have a space where we can come together and do the best we can to be in community in 2D, if not in 3D. Our meeting theme is reckoning with our pasts and building our futures. And as we prepared for this meeting, we on the staff, and then soon in conversation with the folks you're going to be hearing from shortly, really decided it was really important to reflect on the set of commitments and statements that so many of us made and saw and witnessed in 2020, and talk about what it means to go from that to action and reflect on what we've already learned in terms of the challenges and possibilities. So you'll be hearing more about that. I think the events of January 6th makes this conversation even more urgent, if that's possible. The bald face, clear appearance and threats of white supremacy that are baked into our cultures and institutions in this country. I think we've been having a national extra level set of dialogue in this country certainly since the social movements that kicked up after George Floyd's murder on May 25th and so many other incidents and murders in the summer. For us, I think as DPLA and as a DPLA community, it's really given us an opportunity to re-examine and rethink about our work, what it means within an American context and within that history. I think we're in a lucky position as an organization and as a movement to be grounded in a mission that is about equity to access. And I think this reflection has allowed us, as certainly at the board level, I've felt it, and to a person on the staff, to recommit ourselves to make sure that when we talk about equity in action and equity to access, it's not just words, but it conveys itself in deeds. And that we become part of the solution, that we've got an opportunity, a moment as a nation, as a field, to be part of a project of liberation and to be in solidarity with movements that are in momentum and in formation and in action across the country and the world. And speaking for the DPLA staff, we're passionate to be able to wake up in the morning and be part of that work. 2021 for us means defining what that means when we wake up in the morning and being clear about where we can add value and where we can work in allyship and in solidarity with others. We don't have all the answers as we go about defining that work. You'll hear that today. It's part of the reason why we're convening conversations like this, to learn from and to be in community with others. There's nothing we do on our own. We're going to make mistakes. And we'll share those, and we're going to learn things, and we're going to share those. So I really am thankful that you're all here with us today to kick off this year in this incredible moment in American history. A couple things I want to highlight before handing it over to that conversation. First of all, happy 20th anniversary to Wikipedia. I'm not going to name check Catherine because Wikipedia belongs to all of us, I think I can say confidently. Happy Wikipedia Day. I'm really happy to announce that we've now, DPLA for the last year, we've partnered with 200 institutions, 200 of our partners, to provide a pipeline of 1.3 million images into the Wikimedia Commons. It makes DPLA the largest provider of content to the Wikimedia Commons, as far as I've been able to tell. The news today, Boston Public Library was able to upload 8,000 images this week into Wikimedia Commons. So, we are very proud to be an allyship with Wikipedia and Wikipedians and the Wikimedia Foundation. I want to give a special shout out to our data fellow, Dominic Bird McDevitt, who's been leading that work for us for the last year, and to Sloan Foundation, which has enabled that. If you're not one of those 200 organizations that are working with us on Wikipedia and you want to, hit us up. Couple other brief notes. Our ebooks work is continuing to grow. As some of you know, we're onboarding new publishers with rapidity. The news broke in December that we're in talks with Amazon about helping the exclusive titles that Amazon has for the first time be available to American readers through libraries. Michelle Kimpton wrote a post kind of updating that I think that there's there's a link in the chat about that. We have new publishers coming on, and I think you'll see in the coming weeks and months, among other things, growth in our work to ensure that we create flexible opportunities for publishers and librarians to come together. You can hear a lot more about that in a webinar that every library is hosting for us on Wednesday, January 27th. You can hear from Michelle Kimpton and our eBooks team in greater detail about that. There are also 2 events coming up for our hub members. One is, last year we started, in order to create some opportunity of community during this time of distance, a brown bag series of conversations with and for our hubs members. The next one of that is Thursday. It's going to feature California Digital Library talking about discoverability. That's link is floating around, and if you're a hub member, you've seen it. The Network Council, our Hub's National Network Council, is meeting February 2nd, and that's going to include updates from all of the working groups in the Network Council, as well as from DPLA and our advisory council. The last bit that I get to announce is DPLA Fest is coming this May, a theme of transformation through community. And we'll have more details for that coming up. You can go to newsletter.dp.la anytime to sign up to get our updates, and of course at DPLA on Twitter. And if I've forgotten things in the update, I'm sure the team will be throwing them into the chat as we go forward. Last thing I want to share is, is this who we are at DPLA Central. DPLA is a broad community of folks and actors, but the folks who have the privilege to wake up every day and do the work are the 12 folks you see there. And I want to take a point of privilege just to say how proud and honored I am to work with each and every one of them. As you all know, and for all of us, the last 10 months have been challenging in a wide array of ways. And the team at DPLA has stood up robustly with passion, compassion, and joy above and beyond my expectations. And so I'm very proud to be part of a team that's really come through, and we feel really excited and confident about what the future means for that team. With that, I am going to turn the mic over to Elaine Westbrooks, who you heard from earlier, to kick off the discussion. Then I'll come back to hand it over to the panel.
Thank you, John. I've already introduced myself as a member of the board, and I'm really proud to be a member of DPLA, and I'm really excited about all the work that they have accomplished. And I think you're in for a treat. I mean, we will have a panel after I share a few thoughts, and you'll get to hear how some of the people, our partners, are doing some really amazing things. So I'm just going to kick off today's talk with some thoughts about the topic. We're talking about reckoning with our past and building our future. And so what I can say is, if having experienced this global pandemic and how it has been impacting communities in very different kinds of ways, having seen racial unrest in our country, having seen the economic impact of the pandemic on this country, and then finally, insurrection. If these things, all of these things do not convince you that we desperately need a reckoning, then I do not know what would convince you. Reckoning is about accounting and accountability. And what I can say is there are no shortcuts to a multiracial democracy. It's a work in progress. And before we talk about unity, we have to talk about reparations, change, accountability, and reckoning. What I could say off the top is that libraries are the cornerstone of democracy, and we can play a pivotal role in helping our citizens be citizens and teach what citizenship means. But we're also responsible for keeping this democracy alive. We have taken our democracy for granted far too long. And one thing I'd like to mention is that, if you hear a description of what happened on January 6th, the insurrection, and if you want to talk about it fully, you cannot talk about what happened without making the connection between white supremacy and democracy. That's why I say a multiracial democracy. That's the only way that it can fully exist. One of the things, in addition to libraries being the cornerstone of democracy, we play an important role in that historical record, preserving the record, the accountability of the record, and holding our lawmakers accountable, holding each other accountable. This is the mission and goal of archives for centuries. And I know many of you out there work in this area of the record. The record is critical for understanding where we've been and then making sense of where we are today. One of the things that we've learned is that despite the fact that we have very good intentions, the library profession has not always done well when it comes to equity. And we have been complicit and participated in a great deal of inequity, upholding white supremacy in our policies, practices, and procedures. The way we describe people in our archives and our catalogs and our metadata systems can be dehumanizing. And that's something that that many of us are committed to changing. And I know that's certainly happening at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. But the main part is that our record, the historical record, as well as the archives and all the things that we collect, we have definitely erased communities. We've erased queer communities, disabled communities, Black communities, Indigenous communities. There's an erasure there, and that has to be rectified some way. I also like to mention is we need to know our history. We need to know the history of this country. We need to know the history of our organizations. We need to know the history of our profession. This is really important. If we don't know our history, we will definitely be destined to make the same mistakes over and over. And libraries are a big part of helping us understand our history. So with those thoughts, I wanted to focus on the future. And what do we do now? And I would say that many of us have been very committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And since June of 2020, we were racism. And so we really have to commit to how are we going to dismantle the systems that are perpetuating inequity, upholding white supremacy and patriarchy. And so the first thing I'd like to say is you have to do this at every level of your organization, but it starts at the top. It has to be the leadership. And so the things that leaders have to do is first declare a goal and intent to be an anti-racist organization and to set up a strategy for what that means. You also have to put money on the table, right? This has to be more than good feelings and good intentions. You have to put the money and resources behind it. And so once you declare that commitment, you also need to describe how the organization is transformed because of this new approach to inclusion, diversity, and equity since the death of George Floyd. And I think that's something that a lot of us are challenged with is, well, what's different now? What has changed? And why is it not good enough what we were doing before? Why wasn't having a diversity committee enough? I also like to say that we have to lay the groundwork. A lot of us, including myself, are not trained to do this work. I hired a consultant and we need expertise. There is a curriculum that is set up around this, and we need to do the work of the consultants. We need to have expertise that we rely on, but we also need people in our organization who can guide these activities. And I would also argue that that person needs to be on the leadership team. I also like to say that the leadership needs to set up incentives to reward the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion and anti-racism. And then the systems analysis is critical. So according to Ijoma Alua, and I think I messed up her name, but she says systemic racism is a machine that runs whether we pull the levers or not, or by just letting it be. We are responsible for what it produces. And so we recognize that library systems increase inequity in a variety of ways, and these systems have to be identified and then analyzed. And you have to know what's wrong with the system. You need an intervention plan to address what's going on with the system, and then you need a strategy to fix it. And so what we're doing, at least in my organization, is we're trying to connect leaders in an organization with a consultant to understand the system so that they can begin to dismantle them. So when you talk about, well, what systems? Well, libraries and archives and museums are full of dozens of systems. Human resources is a system, budget and finance. So for example, your fines policy, your reimbursement policy, archives, collections, fundraising and development are systems. Communications is a system. Space and facilities. One of the things we're doing is we're reviewing portraiture. And when we have people who come into our spaces, are they welcome by the things we put on the walls, the artwork? Is that a welcoming environment? Is inclusive? Scholarly communications is a system. Information technology, information literacy. The systems are metadata systems. Those are systems that must be examined. And so what we're doing now is trying to figure out, for those of you who just don't see the systems and how they work, we're trying to figure out ways to train people to look at the systems, to understand them, and to figure out how do I integrate this into my organization. I will close by saying the biggest problem I see is that people say, I don't have time, Elaine. If I had more time, I could do much more equity work. And the fact of the matter is, it's not a time problem, right? If you're approaching it as a time problem, then you're doing it incorrectly. It's not addition or subtraction. We have to completely revisit our work and change the paradigm around what we do. And so it's not a matter of getting another 2 hours a week. It is a matter of understanding your work, understanding the systems, and then understanding how you can bring equity and anti-racism to that system. And so I think that's what's also obvious is it's not necessarily one person in an individual effort. I know particularly at my organization, there are so many interdependencies. One cataloger alone to be, you have to work as a team. And so what I think about is the individual level and then the team level, and then how do you work this out with your colleagues? And so there are so many levels of examination and intervention that have to come together when we think about what needs to change. I also like to say that this work requires the commitment of the supervisor, managers, everybody in the organization to have it done. Because what I typically hear is, well, if my supervisor would take away this work, I'll have time to do equity. And the reality is, and actually, let me back up. That is a legitimate challenge is time. So I don't want to say that that's not important or diminish it. But what I'm saying is you have to transform the work. It is not about time. It's about how you do your work and what is important in that work. So those are just some thoughts I wanted to share with you. I think there'll be some time for questions after we hear from our panelists. So I'll turn it over. Is it back to you, John, or to Shanae?
Well, I'm just the middleman to say thank you, Elaine. To amend something I said earlier, which, just to be clear, DPLA Fest is going to be virtual. We're not going to be in person in May. It would be nice. And thank you, Elaine. That was the perfect kickoff and tee off. And Elaine was part of kicking off our prior DPLA Fest. And I think that, conversation that you kicked off there has helped inspired the work we've been doing since and this conversation. So thank you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Shanae to bring us into the deeper conversation. Shanae Morain's been with us about 15 months, since the last community meeting. Now it's the first time I can introduce her as our Director of Community Engagement. Over to you in Atlanta.
Thank you, John. And thank you, Elaine, for setting us off with talking about how the library profession has been complicit. In his 1966 essay, Report from an Occupied Territory, James Baldwin, American author and activist, quotes the lyrics of a 1964 rock song, which are really appropriate to the conversation we're having today. The quote is, "I can't believe what you say because I see what you do." This summer, in response to the uprisings and calling for racial justice, many of our cultural heritage organizations, corporations, and influencers from industries of all kinds authored statements of solidarity with the movement for Black lives and updated DEI statements that had already been in place. I'm proud that DPLA's DEI statements were already being analyzed during this time. Recognizing the legacies of racism and white supremacy in member institutions and how that's resulted in the failure to develop collections that are truly representative of the public we serve, DPLA's Network Council began drafting a document to guide the creation of more inclusive and diverse collections as a part of their 2019 priorities. Approved this July, the IDEAS, which stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, Access, and Social Justice, this statement, it unifies the membership around a clear expression of intent to actively work on closing this content deficit and identifying how a national digital library can and should respond. It's us saying what we will do. This past year has been punctuated by events that demand that we reckon with our past. And these times require that we be clear about what we say we are and accountable for what we say we'll do. In 2021, the DPLA Network Council is building on this 2019 strategy and work, but also moving from statements to action to build our futures. We're taking action in 3 areas with people, practice, and programming, grounded in inclusivity and this larger consciousness of the history of injustice in our institutions. With people, we're building diverse networks, coalitions, and institutional collaborations to empower a pipeline of leaders of color in the library and archival field. We're evaluating our practices and how we invest in internal and external training, like Elaine said, as well as these infrastructure tools that will enable a more robust and diverse national programming landscape. And how we design, that program with our partners to ensure that underrepresented communities are included, particularly as it relates to DPLA being able to prototype and create solutions for digital access. To kick our conversation off, I'd like to introduce members of DPLA's network community who have led and influenced our work that considers equity holistically. This afternoon, they'll give insight into what we've done and the work that's left to be done to live up to our common commitments in 2021. Cecily Marcus is the curator of the Givens Collection of African American Literature and Performing Arts Archives, the Upper Midwest Literary Archive at the University of Minnesota. Cecily is also the principal investigator of Umbra Search African American History and co-chair of DPLA's Advisory Council. Penelope Shoemaker is the metadata librarian at the State Library of Ohio. She is co-chair of the DPLA Metadata Working Group, whose members have been evaluating existing collecting and digitization policies for exclusionary practices and institutional biases that prioritize one culture and or group over another. Well, we're also joined by Dr. Marcia Walker-McWilliams, who is the Executive Director of the Black Metropolis Research Consortium at the University of Chicago Library. It's a Chicago-based membership association of libraries, universities, museums, community art organizations, and other archival institutions, whose mission it is to connect all who seek to document, share, understand, and preserve the Black experience. Thank you all for being with us today. My first question is for Penelope. In response to the George Floyd protests and the summer of racial reckoning, and all of these statements that libraries have produced around solidarity, Black Lives Matter, DPLA's Metadata Working Group began drafting the statement on potentially harmful content in August 2021, based on the initial statement for the Black Women's Suffrage Digital Collection. What do we need to change about the way we do our work to be more in line with who we say we are in these kinds of statements? From your experience on the metadata working group drafting this statement, how do we move from statements to actions?
Thanks, Shanae. One of the biggest elements we as the metadata working group wanted to include in the statement was acknowledging that libraries and archives had work to do, specifically as it relates to descriptive practices. We wanted to include information in the statement about how libraries often write descriptions, including the practices of reusing terminology from the original item to standardize vocabulary from things like the Library of Congress, and how these practices need to be evaluated. So after acknowledging that we need to evaluate this, how do we evaluate it? In the case of the metadata working group, our next step is going to be is writing best practices for metadata so that, as Elaine was talking about, our work will be baked into it. So starting with, it's not something you're doing separately, but as you're writing metadata, what should it look like? What things do you need to keep in mind? And so the goal of writing these best practices is to be that we can actively apply these statements. We have an idea of where to start when we're creating the metadata from the beginning.
Thank you, Penelope. I'd like to open the follow-up question up to our other panelists. What specific practices and policies must we commit to deconstructing to bring about actionable change? Where are you all seeing barriers to curating equitable and inclusive collections in your home institutions?
Thanks, Shanae. Thank you, Penelope. I would also add that some of the barriers could include physical spaces and the reputations that institutions and libraries might have within larger communities, especially, with Black and Brown folks and diverse communities. If your space, your physical space, if your culture is not opening and welcoming, your collections will not be perceived as such as well. So I also would argue that there is important work that often has to be done within an organization to make itself more accessible and inviting, that then opens up the ability to have conversations and to work, through an equitable partnership with diverse communities.
And I thank you for both of your perspectives. I would also think about the way that sometimes our zeal for access can in fact be barriers to equitable and ethical relationships. I'm thinking of the collections that we digitize, that we make available without regard sometimes for the people whose work is represented in those collections, who may not have intended those collections to be archived and made available, the peoples whose lives are being represented and who were not consulted, who did not give permission, and trying to make thoughtful decisions in conversation with our communities to make sure that the decisions we're making about access are actually in line with the kinds of partnerships and relationships we want to build and be part of.
Thank you, Marcia and Cecily. You both have talked about access and relationships. Each of you lead initiatives that preserve and make accessible collections documenting Black history and culture that are connected or either housed in well-endowed majority white universities. How have you all navigated working with communities to build these strong reciprocal relationships and advocate for, their shared stake in the project, and their welcoming into the space and to and efforts, recognizing and overcoming this historical legacy of exclusion and ignoring their history or making decisions about access without their permission? Marcia, Cecily, either of you want to start that and respond to that question?
Sure, I can jump in. And to echo Elaine's wonderful comments to open this up, it is important to be honest and transparent, right? To know the history of your institution with the local communities. Far too often, when it comes to majority white institutions, their relationships with the communities around them, especially with communities of color, has not been good. And so when you step into a space of wanting to open up and have conversations, you do have to be very transparent about that past and acknowledge that past. But you also have to be fully committed to a different kind of future, and not one that you predetermine from within that kind of ivory tower, but one in which you're saying, we want to build this together with you. What does that look like? And so often, you know, if we approach partnership from, we have an idea of what we want, we need you to help us get it, that's not an equitable or ethical form of engaging communities. It has to be, we're committed to doing better. How do we do better? And how can we do that in partnership with you? So some of the things that the BMRC has been working on, and we're fortunate to have a grant from the Mellon Foundation that has really allowed us to allocate resources to community engagement and collection diversification. So that on the one hand, we are going to communities directly and saying, how can we help you with your legacy management? How can we help you with the collections that you might be stewarding within your communities? What are the things that you need to know to empower you if you are going to engage in relationships with majority institutions, or even if you are just going to be stewarding or caring for your own collection of materials? At the same time, we're allocating resources for our member institutions such that we are having a series for them where they're able to learn more about cultural diversity competency, to learn more about collection diversification, and how do you do that in an equitable way. And then we're also having, as a part of that series, now that we know this information, what are the action items? What does this actually look like in terms of our individual institutions? And how do we make concrete plans in order to make that happen? So I think there's a lot of transparency, honesty, and really being willing to examine what has not worked in the past, and what are the tools that you need in order to be able to do this work. Because it does require expertise, it does require a financial commitment, and it often will require, you know, holding the mirror up to your institution and saying, you know, what aren't we doing as well inside that's building a culture that allows us to do this work?
And I'm speaking in the context of both Umbra Search African American History and my work as curator of the Gibbons Collection. Umbra Search, for those of you who don't know, just very quickly, leverages the DPLA corpus. I think it might be the greatest consumer of the DPLA corpus through its API to create an aggregation of resources representing all aspects of African American history and life. About 2/3 of our content comes from DPLA. The partnerships that are really the underpinning of Umbra Search take many forms. And one of the things that I think has been very important to us is making sure that these partnerships are equitable rather than equal, and that equity is a foundation of that relationship rather than an afterthought. Some of those partnerships mean contributors who, for whatever reason, don't yet or don't contribute content to DPLA, and finding ways to include their content in Umbra Search, even if there are limited infrastructure and resources for such projects. An example is including the unique content of the Weeksville Heritage Center through its Omeka exhibit and its API. Another part of partnerships has been part of community outreach, and that often includes organizations and entities that don't have digital content, that are not in the business of libraries or anything like that, but for whatever reason, an arts organization, a community organization have a synergistic mission to the work of Umbra Search. And again, resources often that are supplied by grants are very helpful, where Umbra Search might be able to partner with an organization for an event and collaboratively plan that event, but Umbra Search might be coordinating the logistics, doing the promotion, paying for the catering, things like that, and having the sort of curation and design come from our partners. But I think what really strikes me as being important in these relationships is that there is, I think, a fundamental and ongoing fragility. Often this work is funded by grants, And it does become harder to sustain those relationships and those efforts once those funds have been spent. And often these efforts are in the context of digital initiatives, which are always seem to be funded by grants. So I think that the questions of funding really do have an impact on how well and how successfully we can live up to the commitments that we make.
Thank you both. You both talked about building in collaboration with communities and how institutional support and funding affects that work. Penelope, join in on this question as well. What kind of initiatives do you think would be helpful to increase racial equity in cultural heritage organizations? Ongoing direct support, prioritizing digitization and programming, our metadata practices, reanalyzing our funding and re-granting protocols, and thinking about hiring and professional development. What kinds of initiatives have you all seen work well?
Well, I'll just jump in. I think that you know, a lot of the work has to be inspired, much as the work that Penelope described of harmful language statements, by principles to do no harm. And that means acknowledging harm that has been done historically and understanding and knowing what that harm is. I think some of the really concrete things that we can do include dedicating funding lines to digital projects and efforts, making those positions available and accessible to early career librarians, many of whom the cohort might be more diverse than we might find at higher levels of our organization or of our field, and having pathways for growth and promotion and movement upwards in the field. I think that there needs to be a lot of work, and I know many of us are trying to do this around culturally competent description of diverse collections, and really reviewing how our practices of processing at a box or folder level are not serving our item level description well at all. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Cecily. That was great. So many wonderful ideas and thoughts there. I would also add as well, seeing the community as a source of expertise is really important. There might be community members who have been doing the work of collecting and describing and making accessible, collections and important materials. And so developing relationships with those individuals to help inform your process, right? To help, inform professional development opportunities for your staff, I would say is also really important. So kind of looking to community as a resource and providing financial support for that as well is very important. I would also say, just diversifying the profession in general and really opening up opportunities for, young archivists and librarians, especially from underrepresented communities, to do this work is really important. And again, not in silo, because, issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and thinking about racial equity, that, cuts across pretty much nearly everyone's role within a library in some way, shape, or form. So there's the fact of kind of baking that into roles, but I would also say providing space and opportunity for young professionals of color to exist within those organizations. And not just exist, but thrive, because retention is also often an issue. If you're bringing folks of color in, but your culture is not conducive to supporting them and ensuring that they are also having access to promotion and to greater levels of leadership within the organization, that can literally blow up in your face and actually make it harder to attract and retain young professionals of color.
I just wanted to add with Marsha what she was saying about seeing the community as a source, I think that's really important with metadata. Sometimes when you're writing it, you don't think about going back to where the collections came from and talking to experts in your community where the items are from, and might know people in the pictures or very basic things, but would really inform better metadata and best practices.
Thank you all. That last piece about centering communities is, the authorities on the collections, and also folks who have, information to bear about the collections is really what it means to bake in equity holistically. Given you all's experiences in partnerships that align with DPLA, where do you and how do you see DPLA partnering and calling in more folks to do this work with us? What else can DPLA do to expand and support on DEI work in the field from what you've seen?
I think with these statements and best practices, what we're seeing is that a lot of institutions in our hubs across the country are starting to look at them as examples. We're hearing that a lot in our conversations, is writing them is giving other institutions a place to start and evaluate how to evaluate their best practices. Another thing that DPLA has an opportunity to do is with their API, they can evaluate how in these collections all the way across the country, how different racial groups are presented and what collections may be missing, or how the historical narrative is written in these collections and how can we make that better.
I would definitely echo Penelope's comments about DPLA as a kind of connector and convener, just given the breadth, of organizations that you all interact with or partner with. I think there's a real opportunity to serve as a space for institutions across different geographic barriers, or institutions that are more public facing versus, libraries that might be more academic in nature and on college campuses. I think there's a real opportunity for DPLA to bring into conversation different kinds of libraries and the communities that they serve. I would also say, given the, the kind of number of items that DPLA has in the sheer volume, there's a real opportunity to partner with institutions and communities about the stories that can be created from those items and the ways in which we can kind of activate and really become engaged with those items and the kinds of stories that they tell. So I think there's also some real opportunity for, innovative programming and thematic kind of explorations of some of the documents and items that are available through DPLA.
And I would love to see DPLA follow the lead of some of your partners, given the standing and the leadership position that DPLA holds, and exhort or invite partners and institutions to prioritize the digitization of diverse collections for the next year or for the next 2 years. And to look within their collections that they may not consider to be diverse for the parts that certainly are, because our collections, even when built on premises and by white supremacists, they're going to have representations and aspects that may push against that or may be important to know, just in the ways that they've been put in service of white supremacy. I think that the model with the Black Women's Suffrage Portal of regranting, providing funds to institutions for digitization, for infrastructure, is also a really important and positive way that DPLA can help lead this effort.
That was incredible. Thank you, Cecily, Marcia, and Penelope for your contributions to this conversation and your continued thought leadership with DPLA. And as we, uncover these pathways for equity, diversity, and inclusion, and think about the nuances that are involved in creating programming and practices and relationship building with our partners for the future. So thank you all very much. And now we're going to open up our Q&A. DPLA staff have been monitoring the chat. If you all have any questions, please post them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And while we're gathering those questions, John started us off announcing DPLA Fest 2021. In the spirit of collaboration, we would like your input. We are considering several scheduling options for the upcoming fest, thinking about our digital world and how we interact. Which would be best for your schedule? You all will see a poll come up, 2 to 3 consecutive days of programming, which would be about 2 to 3 hours each day, 1 to 2 hours each day over the course of a week, or 1 to 2 hours each week over the course of a month. We want to design DPLA Fest 2021 virtually with your bandwidth and best engagement in mind. So thank you for participating in that poll. I'm looking in the Q&A box. Not seeing any questions. I'd like to thank again our panelists for this rich discussion, and thank Elaine for starting us out and contextualizing where we are and specifically what libraries and archives must do to overcome white supremacy and our complacency in the work and advocate for democracy and our continued democracy. I'll now invite our board chair, Denise, to give us final remarks.
Certainly, and thank you, Shanae, and thank you to our panel for those very thoughtful insights. And I think that, pointing to some very significant reflection that we as information organizations need to do. Because as someone said earlier, as Elaine said earlier, we're not expert at this, but we're going to have to figure it out, because it is as important in our time and the day we're living in today and the issues we address today as it has ever been. And we do have an important role in maintaining not only the historical record, but helping with ensuring that there is the opportunity to have that reckoning that has been discussed. I'm very impressed with the conversation and took quite a few notes. So thank you for that assistance. And I hope that this was a useful conversation for our many participants today. And we certainly want to thank everybody who participated and took the time to sit in on our conversation. I think it's been very
Denise,
much worth our while.
Can I just jump in? There's one question that's popped in Q&A, which I wanted to highlight, which is, and this is for the room, and maybe the panel wants to turn their cameras back on, and Elaine and Denise and Shanae, y'all can.
I'll turn mine off.
If folks have advice for new professionals looking to incorporate all of the important values you discussed into our work. That's a big question, and maybe I'll start with you, Elaine, partly to give you an opportunity to bring us in for a landing since you kicked us off.
Yeah, I mean, I get that question a lot, and I would say that the first thing is you really have to know your stuff, right? Like if you're a cataloger, know your cataloging. And I think the biggest challenge is people don't understand the systems and how they create the inequity. So my advice is read everything that you can read. And I'm not just talking about all the stuff that's coming out. I don't feel like a lot of our professionals understand the history of our profession and how it formed. But you have to understand the history. You have to do your research. You have to read the United States history and understand why a predominantly white mob causing an insurrection is not a new thing in the United States history, right? So you have to do your homework. You have to understand the systems. And then I think once you do that, you actually put yourself in a better position to create change. And I think the problem is people just want to jump ahead and create the change, be woke, do something. And I love the passion, but you really have to build the skills if you're going to do something and you're going to do it well and you're going to be able to sustain it.
Did we see any other questions in the chat? All righty. Thank you for that question. Thank you for that thoughtful reply, Elaine. Well, I think we're at the end of the program. Again, thank you all for participating, both our audience and our panelists. Very much worth our time, I believe, and really look forward to these kinds of engagements in the future. That being said, I think we're able to adjourn. I hope everybody has a fabulous rest of your afternoon. And oh my God, it's Friday. A great weekend, a long one for you. And, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay tuned. Good afternoon, folks.